I haven't read much sci-fi before. I've hit the basics, Dune, Ender's Game, Foundation, the set canon, if you will, the beginner's guide, but I haven't really gone beyond that. So I came across this book called A Fire Upon the Deep, found the premise interesting and gave it a shot. And so today we're going to take a look at it because it's a very, very different story from anything I've read before. The story begins with a group of human researchers exploring an ancient archive. And at this point in the world, you're understanding we are thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years into the future, into some distant, unknown world. Unknown completely to us, completely alien. And so these researchers are exploring this ancient archive, and they have uncovered something utterly amazing, never before found, but also incredibly dangerous. They found something that is now after them. And so they're attempting to flee. They're getting the spaceship going. They're turning the engines on. They're calculating distance, getting ready to make the jump to light speed. But whatever they have awakened is able to act within a split second. And it causes, once they push that button and try and make that jump to flee from this place, the fleeing vessel destroys explodes. They accidentally destroy their own ship because the screens in front of them, the numbers they're getting reports, the computers, everything's lying to them, and it just utterly destroys, kills all of them except one fleeing vessel. This is going to be a rough summary and talking of the kind of an overall of the main story points that work well, and kind of going into the themes and what makes this story work, what may make it not work. And certainly, just a heads up, I am not going to get all the moments right. There's a lot in this book and a lot that can be missed. Like, I had to go back over some sections. I had to read back through and make sure I understood certain ones because it doesn't really hold your hand, which is great, but it also means, just a heads up, I'm going to get some stuff wrong. So if I do, please let me know down in the comments below. Now, I'm going to do something potentially for this book that the author doesn't really want, which is to clearly lay out an effect on the world that massively controls how the entities operate, and it really, really controls and guides how a lot of this story works, because a lot of this story is built on the reader putting the pieces together themselves. Think of it. If we were to write about our own world and talk about gravity, we're not going to go into what it does or how it affects things. We're just going to go, there's gravity. We don't know much, maybe where it comes from, but we know how it affects, and that's it. All this isn't explained, but it has real effects on our world. And it's the same for this world, this sci-fi world, thousands and thousands of years into the future. And so you do lose some of the mystery and the unspecified nuance by just laying it out, something like this, because as you're reading through this story, they're making a reference to, oh yeah, there's this thing, and then nothing else, because of course it's known to them. And so as the reader, we're like, oh, does that mean something? Does it not? We're trying to piece this together. So I think it helps make sense of the story, because there were a number of times that I was completely lost when you lay something else like this. But again, I just want to give you a warning, you do lose some of this subtlety, some of the introduction to this story when you kind of go, okay, and here's the chart, here's a rough breakdown for everything. But either way, it really does help understand, and it helps understand why this book is so different. And so for this story, there are 3 zones, I think technically 4 zones: the transcend, the beyond, and the slow zone, and then there's like the unthinking depths. These zones basically control what level of technology can happen and can exist in each level, if you will. For example, the transcend is where this high level of technology can exist, like just mind-blowing next level, and it develops to a level where it's really common, and it develops so fast that it's common that these civilizations destroy themselves. They create weapons or powers that eventually just eat them or destroy them, or they kill each other, and they're on a completely different level than anything else, beyond understanding. It's this transcendent level. Think of it, in the Imperial Age, with the European powers coming to these, quote unquote, savage lands. There's just power imbalance where they're just technologically on different levels, which really set them apart. Or even more so, think if we were to, if someone else were to come colonize us, to show up in medieval Europe with, space technology, it's like, okay, this is a different level. And the next zone is the beyond. This is kind of like the middle zone. This is where a lot of the novel takes place, and this is kind of fairly advanced, what you would expect reading a sci-fi book. Fairly advanced, normal, quote-unquote normal sci-fi worlds live. Thousands of different races exist, trade, war, everything else. Technology from the transcend up above, this greater technology is very valuable, but also there's a great chance it doesn't work because it's not in the transcend. And it's this border between the zone that keeps most tech from crossing over because it can't exist on these lower planes of thought. And so the same is for the slow zone, below the beyond. We have transcend, beyond, and the slow zone. Faster than light ships that can travel in through the middle beyond, if they drift too close to the slow zone, will stop working as well, and they'll get stuck because their engine's basic stuff starts to fail. Things really start to break down. And folks may find themselves trapped for 100 or thousands of years until they can get out as their ship just kind of drifts through space. If they make it out again, because everything from the beyond going into the slow to the lower zones, it might start working. So there's this constant tension for there. And this keeps most civilizations in their perspective layer and prohibits a higher zone civilization from going below and easily conquering a lower tech system or civilization. And so now for our actual story. So we kind of set the scene for the tech and the different boundaries for it. So Ravna is our main point of view and one of the lead characters. She works as a relay operator for a trade outpost selling bandwidth, interconnecting the greater galaxy, and all's fine and normal. She's going into her day-to-day, everything's great until an entity called a power, a force of unknown form and being and ability, and of course power, arrives and begins buying a fortune's worth of bandwidth and connectivity. And this is one thing that I really love that the author does so good with this, is what the author is having this mystery. It's a part that almost goes against the grain of what you might consider good world building. He doesn't explain everything. There's this real good strategy about what you explain and what you don't, and how to really draw the audience in and let them use their imagination. There are vast regions of mystery that are not explained in this world, but you don't have to. This power is a major customer of their business, and Ravna is there, to meet the power's, named associate and find out as much about the power as can be, and ensure, hopefully that he continues to buy bandwidth from them. And then this is where we introduce kind of our next lead is Pham Nguyen, a newly awakened human from the slow zone, from years ago, awakened from cold sleep, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and an old school trader from a long time ago who lived and worked in the slow zone, a relic of the past, if you will. They meet and talk. They end up going out, meeting these two Scroderiders, this peaceful alien race that is kind of a mix between a sort of sea plant and an alien race combined with a mechanical cart or rider, if you will, that helps them roll around on land. Again, they're really going out there with the alien stuff, which is awesome. It's really fun. And they've all heard these rumors of something emerging from what's called the Stromley realm in the transcend that's caused several planets to go dark, because not much is known except that the human researchers there, they must have found something dangerous and awoken it. But, it does happen, but this one seems to be particularly dangerous. And, but this may be a bit of a stretch, but there were scenes in Pokemon that did this mystery delving for me as a child. We're going to take a real quick look at Cerulean City. You have a building, it has a door behind it, and everything behind that door, there's all this potential behind the door, potential for what could be behind it. But once you go in, all that potential, that great bubble of potential shrinks or expands to match our reality, to match our understanding. But then there are these buildings over here, the ones that you couldn't go inside. And those, for me as a kid especially, lived in forever in potential. And now, because I'm no longer a kid, I know that there's nothing inside. The game makers didn't add something there because you can't go in. And so for a book, think of this idea in terms of potential and revelation. For a book, you can paint a different story. You can have an entity, and for example, in this book, we have an entity called a power and explain very, very little about it and move on. The book doesn't have to offer a greater explanation. It's also interesting that the author didn't call these, AI or a computer modulation number 50,876, something that would immediately grab the audience and tie it to a bit of technology that most people could understand. By not doing that, he keeps us from thinking, oh, okay, so like a computer, but really good. Instead, he calls it a power and leaves it at that. We don't really know much about it. There's kind of this assumption that, okay, it seems to be some sort of computer entity, but it's almost like if you took a computer and then combined it with, the real world intelligence of a person, this quick thinking, this imagination, this next level, but then thousands of years into the future, you catapult it from there, and it almost reaches a level of like godhood, if you will. There's like all this suggestions going in there. So again, think of this as we're going through this book. This is one thing it does really well, where it's answering this question and not answering this. You have this potential and you have this revelation where we're giving you these answers and we're not giving you these answers. So you have all these closed doors in the world. That's part of world building, where you're really expanding on this one, what's through this one door, but you're not explaining what's through this door. And so the audience has this, breadth of imagination that we're like, oh my goodness, what could be behind here and what could do that? And that's what helps provide this ultra rich understanding of, okay, this world feels real. And so we go back to that lone survival vessel that we originally came to, that lone vessel that was escaping of the human researchers that we've learned, were in the Stromley realm, and it lands on a foreign planet. And this is where we're introduced to the Tynes world, which is an interesting world full of creatures that exist in a pack mental state. So they share a mind between 4 or 6 or 7 of these creatures that are kind of like a mix between a dog and a rat. Each pack is a single individual spread across several minds, and it means that one of these pack members could die and be replaced by another, and the individual soul or mind in this case changes, but the individual is still, they continue on. They might change a little bit, but they continue on. And it also means that those with powerful enough wills and minds can live for long periods of time, because, as one of your members dies, you can graft on new members into their pack. And so long as there's like that singular individual, if you will, with that powerful enough will can dominate these new members, that entity, that person, if you will continue. And so the tricky part, this is the balance. So it really gives you this really weird and interesting alien, if you will, culture and race, because it's coming into play. And so this is the funny thing, because they don't have, opposable thumbs, and they're not able to, exist in close proximity without risking, their minds melding. It really limits their technology, but they do have crossbows and all this other stuff, but they're able to operate in this next level because they're multiple arms, multiple hands, multiple individuals, or multiple members, if you will, and they can all think along the same thing. So they can work in sequence. That's like so rapid and so cool. Imagine if you had 2 of yourself and you were trying to put together a puzzle piece, and you can like lay down the pieces one after another. You can slam these in because you're all able to be on the same wavelength. You don't have to have any sort of communication. You just immediately know. But again, this is what keeps them from getting too close to each other, because the mind noise would grow too great, or the individual members would drift apart and become lost or absorbed into other packs. And so this is a big, big problem from this. And so as we come to them, we understand this is kind of a limitation for them, because after all, they are in the slow zone. So they're really, really trapped and limited by this aspect of their race. But this is another thing that the book talks about, is you really start to get a hint, especially as we start delving into the Tynes, you really understand that, hey, they're hundreds, if not maybe 1,000, maybe a few hundred years away from getting space technology. And once they do get there, it's really going to get interesting for them as a race. We really get to see them reach up to that next level. But again, we'll come back to that later. And so now we're coming into why are we here on the Tynes world. And so what we see is we now get our answer as the lone surviving vessel from the Stromley realm lands on a foreign planet. And this is, of course, the Tynes world. We have all these interesting creatures that are coming into effect and everything in this medieval aspect. And so then we start getting an idea of these different factions on the Tynes world. And one of them is incredibly vicious, that is actually going to go forward and attacks the humans and kills one of them, but then the humans start shooting back, and they start, start blasting. And so we start to get an understanding of this, and there's a human girl and a human young boy that we meet as a result of this. And so in the Tynes world, there are 3 characters of note that we'll cover, and there's a lot more in depth and for this part of the story, but this is the tricky part for me. Personally, I didn't find it interesting as the rest. I think it was a good contrast, because you have this medieval world that's going alongside of this ultra futuristic sci-fi world that's going on kind of in parallel. But the tricky part for me is I wanted more of the sci-fi. So this is an aspect of, if you really want to see a medieval world, if you will, a really alien medieval world that starts finding technology, because that's the thing. These Tines, they are incredibly smart. They are able to use all this power, all of this, ingenuity, all this ability that they have as this shared pack. They start making huge bounds and leaps and bounds for technology that we'll see coming into play. And so what you get to see, though, is this, medieval race. We start to see them continually etch higher and higher and higher, getting to the point where, like humans in the Industrial Revolution, where within 150, 100 years, we can go from the steam engine to the internet. We can have this space flight to putting someone on the moon. We have this astronomical, explosion in technology, and all of this is potential. All of this happens because of this foreign race to them has arrived on their planet, and all of the big actors on this planet want to be in control. They want to have this influence. And so the first character, one of the first important characters we have is Woodcarver, queen of the Tines, who lived for 600 years and exists as a powerful but kind ruler, kind of a sort of, she's still done some experimenting with packs, but she's still very much a queen who, orders people to die and she's familiar with power, but she's not exactly, your sort of Hitler or tyrant or anything like that. Next character we come into effect is we have this guy named Flinser, or this Tine called Flinser, a powerful and cruel pack, individual with multiple members, as we've come to find, who's been experimenting with new packs, with torture and pain, trying to create the smartest and cruelest and most powerful Tines that he can. And one that he has created is an individual Tine named Steel, or soon to be Lord Steel. He leads a coup against Flinser, kills most of his pack, and takes power. And Steel is the one who really leads this charge against the humans and attacks. And so what happens is that there's a few other random Tines who are wandering past. They rescue the young girl and take her to Woodcarver, and then Steel ends up killing, a bunch of his people die because the humans start shooting back, but they kill a few of the humans and capture the young boy. So we kind of have this A and B sort of stories that are playing out, and each of them are trying to use the technology of the ship and the technology in the mind of these alien humans for them to build up and bolster their own factions in order so that they can destroy the other. And so now we're going to go back to Ravna. The planet they're on, where they're selling bandwidth, is suddenly attacked by the Blight. And the Blight is what they've nicknamed this new entity, this new power that came from the Stromley realm, this thing that the human researchers back in the beginning have awakened. And it seems the Blight is after the power that Ravna and Fam is working for, an associate of, that Ravna is working for, selling bandwidth. The Blight is after it, trying to destroy it, and has all of these. The Blight as an individual, or whatever it is, again, we don't know what it is. It could be an idea, a computer program, a person, some new, foreign race of aliens that nobody has any idea of. Because again, you understand there is thousands of different races, and all of them are going through their own life cycle in this world. They're all ascending, from the slow zone into the beyond and getting new technology, and then maybe even going to the transcend or slipping back down into the slow zone, destroying themselves, killing themselves. All of this is playing out on this cosmic scale, and we're understanding it's in the filtering of these three zones. But the Blight is able to come in and capture and brainwash and take over all these civilizations in the middle beyond, and sending all of these associates. And so they attack where Ravna's at, and they goes and kills the power, which again, this is always a really cool thing to do as a story, where if you have an entity and you build them up to be a really, really powerful known entity, everyone's showing them deference, everyone's like, whoa, watch out for that guy, and then something else comes in and kills them, you immediately know this new thing is a big deal. So that way you can have that element of surprise where the Blight shows up and immediately attacks and kills this power, but then also without, you don't want to explain what the Blight is and how powerful the Blight is, because that ruins the surprise. So you can have this, surprise attack that comes in, and now the gang has to flee. So Ravna and Fam and the Scrode Riders, believe that they've got to run. And so what they're also doing is they also believe that there's something that the Blight is after. And they believe that this lone ship that originally escaped from the Stromley realm, this one has something on it. This is what the Blight is after. And so if they want to stop the Blight, if they want to be able to fight back, they need to go rescue that ship. They need to go find whatever it is on that ship. The other thing is they're getting a distress call from Jeffrey, the young boy that was on the ship that is now with Lord Steele, who's brainwashing him or, gaslighting him into thinking that Steele is a good guy and that everyone else is out to get them. And so they're constantly trying to kill Woodcarver while also trying to paint themselves as the victim for Jeffrey so they can get help potentially from some alien race, lure them in and take this technology for their own. And so Pham and Ravna and the Scroder Riders are heading off. They did all this makeshift repairs in preparation for their ship to be able to operate in the slow zone. Because again, if you take middle beyond technology and go down into the slow zone, which is where right on the edge, I think right in the slow zone is where the Tynes world is. It's on this edge. And as we can see, it's hinted that as the Tynes are able to, figure out more and more of this technology, what they can do, their planet as itself is moving farther and more, possibly even into the middle beyond. And so we see this ascension going from here. And so the gang is all running away and they're fleeing from this invading army that's destroying everything as the Blight seemingly now is doing the impossible. A transcend being is reaching into the beyond with its influence and power and destroying and killing all these civilizations and taking over one after another. And so Ravna and Pham, the Scroder Riders, are leaving. They're out. They're on their way and they're kind of chasing away. And so at this point in the story, we're starting to get these notes and little whispers from different points of the galaxy with what's going on, all these rumors and messages. Some of them are propaganda. Some of these people are using it for their own wills. Everything is going into from here. And we're understanding now, we learn horrifically that Ravna's homeworld was destroyed. Billions have died. We also learn the entire Transcend has gone dark. And all these little notes that we're getting and all these people were thinking, what is the Blight? What's the next step? What's it after? What's it going to do? And so they're running. But all they can do is run because there's nothing they can do to fight against the Blight. They can't stop it. And so Ravna and Pham and the whole gang are fleeing. They're being chased now. Later in the story, they're being chased. And even we come into understand that there's a surviving fleet from Ravna's homeworld that joins into this pursuit. Because basically, Ravna and Pham are getting chased by these other people. And so the Ravna's homeworld fleet is chasing those people that are chasing them because, they want revenge after destroying their planet. And they finally, manage to reach out to this captain, try and tell them, give an understanding of what's going on. You can't trust anything. You're doing this. And the commander then is getting a message from his captain, the commander of their own fleet, and he realizes they've been compromised. Something is going on. Because basically, the screens, the message they're receiving, something seems off. And so you understand the Blight just has this massive power. It is able to take over technology, all the screens, all the language, everything that you're hearing and everything you're seeing, everything you're saying to something else can be manipulated, reprogrammed, everything can be changed. So you can't trust anything. And so all of this is going into effect, and we're trying to figure out what's going on because there's all this mystery at play. And this is one thing that I think is so good that he does so great is because the Blight really shares a lot of similarities as a villain, if you will, with Sauron. This unfaceable villain that's felt and never directly seen. We don't really know what they want, or even if they do want, they might be, some transcendent moss or something that has this abilities that's just wants to live. There's no thought, there's just existence. We don't know. There's all this indirect power, this tendrils that are creeping through the whole galaxy. But even more, even more than Sauron was able to do, something that can exist in a way like a software virus. Anything with technology is at risk. And, how can you defeat something like that? And, this is all these questions that are going because we still don't even know what it is. And so the showdown for the book really comes into when Ravna and Pham and the gang arrive on the Tynes world. They're being chased. So, I have this limited window to figure out what's going on and what is at this ship that escaped from the Stromley realm. And so they arrive. Woodcarver, with the help of Joanna, is able to make some rudimentary cannons to attack Steel. And Steel, who's evolved, they've managed to get enough technology from Ravna in the game by saying, hey, if you don't help us destroy Woodcarver, we're all going to die, and the humans will die. So they're able to get radios and guns, and they're fighting each other. They continue to use Jeffrey then, because once the dupe is revealed, they continue to say, hey, we'll kill Jeffrey if you don't use Ravna to use the ship to destroy our enemies. And all this is starting to fail. Everything's starting to fall apart, and this bloodbath is beginning. This fight, this just chaos is going in, because Ravna and the gang show up and turn their guns on Steel. They start blasting, and so Steel is killed in the fight. Fam goes forward and, running on autopilot, finds what they've been after. And so what it does, this entity that they've been chasing after, this thing that they've been after that the Blight has been afraid of, it's this power that ignites the slow zone to massively expand and trap the Blight's entire fleet. Because all this technology that worked in the Middle Beyond, when the slow zone expands, that all that technology suddenly makes it stuck. The entire fleet is stuck in the slow zone space, where it will drift for a few thousand years before it actually arrives to the next planet, which of course is the Tynes world. And in that time, with the help of the humans, Woodcarver and the Tynes expect to possibly have spaceships of their own. And this is another point that I completely missed, or wasn't fully explained, because the Blight can only exist in the transcend, this higher plane of thought, if you will. If it's thrown into the slow zone, then effectively it's been killed or destroyed, along with all traces. On the flip side, the thousands of all these other thousands of worlds have been thrown back into the Dark Ages with the flip of a switch. I've massively oversimplified the plot here, but I wanted to give you a rough outline for the story. I loved it. I enjoyed parts, I should say. I didn't say I loved sections of it. Other sections I think definitely grew stale for me. The Tynes section grew stale, but if you like seeing this kind of transcend, building of a race, of a technology going up, moving up in the world, then you'll love this, because this is a really great example of seeing that play out. But again, it was hard for me. The characters were a little bit tricky. Fam was awesome. He was this dynamic character, old school trader, suddenly pulled forward thousands of years and acts as a good balance to Ravna, who's much more cautious, much more book personality, kind of more straight man, if you will. Fam is much more the adventurer, and she's much more, the careful, thinking, let's go from here step by step. The greater world building is fantastic. Honestly, one of my issues I had with it, if you want to call it an issue, is I wanted more sci-fi. There's a lot of the focus in the story is focused on this medieval world of the times, and you kind of get this juxtaposition between the two of them. And again, it works. It works really well. It's just, I think for me, there are definitely slow points where it definitely started to drag, and then parts where it just rushed through and I couldn't put it down, and then it dragged from there. And so it kind of goes back and forth from there. But all in all, I did like it. I think in summary, the idea and concept for the novel is amazing. It's fantastic. I thought the execution was pretty good. Not mind-blowing, not amazing, but I really did enjoy it. And again, I don't want to belittle the book or downplay it, because the concept is incredible. The Blight, the powers, and this sci-fi. If you want a sci-fi book that really feels alien and not a cookie-cutter Star Wars copy or anything, this is it, and I highly recommend give it a read. Let me know what you think in the comments below. For those of you that are familiar with the story, let me know what I missed. Let me know what you liked. Let me know what your favorite part about the book was. What really sold it for you. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Cassidy, and this is Fiction Applied.